February 1, 1943. Tunis, Tunisia, North Africa. Captain Kendrick R. Bragg pulls back on the control yoke of his B-17 Flying Fortress, climbing through 18,000 feet over the Mediterranean. The morning sun glints off the bomber's aluminum skin as it rises toward the bomber stream assembling above North Africa. 23 years old from Hoquiam, Washington, Bragg has flown 14 missions with the 414th Bomb Squadron. His crew calls him lucky because he's never aborted a mission. Today his luck is about to be tested in ways he cannot imagine. The mission is simple: strike the German-occupied harbor at Tunis and cripple Rommel's supply line. But as Bragg scans the sky for fighters, he doesn't know that in exactly 47 minutes his aircraft will be held together by nothing but faith and physics. The bomber beneath him, tail number 104485, nicknamed All-American 3, is about to become legend. The formation tightens. Bragg counts 32 B-17s climbing through scattered clouds. To his right flies Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker, the squadron commander. To his left, a new crew on their third mission. The bomber's 4 Wright Cyclone engines roar steadily, their combined 4,800 horsepower pulling the 35-ton aircraft higher. Staff Sergeant Harry Newsell, the top turret gunner, rotates his twin 50-caliber machine guns, checking the mechanism. Below, in the cramped ball turret, Sergeant Sam Sarpolis hangs suspended beneath the aircraft, his eyes scanning for the black dots that mean German fighters. The intercom crackles. Someone jokes about breakfast. Someone else complains about the cold. At 20,000 feet, the temperature sits at 20 degrees below zero. Bragg feels the aircraft shudder slightly. Turbulence, nothing more. He adjusts trim, keeping position in the formation. Beside him, co-pilot Lieutenant Godfrey Engel monitors the engine instruments. Oil pressure steady, cylinder head temperatures normal, fuel consumption as expected. Everything looks perfect. Everything feels routine. Navigator Lieutenant Elton Couch hunches over his charts in the nose compartment, calculating wind drift and checking landmarks against their course. Bombardier Lieutenant John Richardson prepares the bomb bay, ensuring the 8 500-pound bombs hang correctly from their shackles. 10 men, 1 aircraft, another mission. Nothing suggests that what's about to happen will rewrite the training manuals. They reach 23,000 feet. The formation levels off, heading east toward the target. Bragg's fingers rest lightly on the controls. He's flown this bomber for 6 months, knows every vibration, every sound, every quirk. The number 3 engine runs slightly rough. The number 2 tends to overheat and climbs. The tailwheel doesn't fully retract, but she flies straight, drops her bombs accurately, and always brings them home. That's what matters. That's all that matters. The gunners maintain their watch, searching the sky in overlapping arcs of vision. The Luftwaffe owns these skies. German fighters have decimated bomber formations in recent weeks. The 8th Air Force is bleeding. Every mission costs aircraft. Every mission costs men. The call comes over the radio. Bandits high at 2 o'clock. Bragg tenses. His hands tighten on the controls. The formation doesn't waver. They push forward. This is what they trained for. This is what they knew was coming. But what happens next isn't a German fighter attack. What happens next is something far worse. Something so improbable that when Bragg reports it, intelligence officers will initially refuse to believe him, because in the next 60 seconds, All-American 3 will collide with another B-17 at 23,000 feet. And somehow, impossibly, both aircraft will survive the impact. Well, survive might be too strong a word. What All-American 3 becomes after the collision shouldn't be able to fly. It shouldn't be able to maintain altitude. By every law of physics and aerodynamics, it should disintegrate immediately, tumbling from the sky in pieces, taking 10 men to their deaths. But it doesn't. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress represented America's answer to strategic bombing. Engineers designed the aircraft to penetrate deep into enemy territory, absorb tremendous punishment, and return home. The name Flying Fortress wasn't marketing hyperbole. The bomber bristled with 13 50-caliber machine guns mounted in 5 positions: nose, top turret, ball turret, waist, and tail. A crew of 10 operated the aircraft. 4 officers in front, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier. 6 enlisted men behind, flight engineer and top gunner, radio operator, 2 waist gunners, ball turret gunner, and tail gunner. When these bombers flew in formation, they created overlapping fields of fire that could shred attacking fighters. But by early 1943, the bombing campaign was faltering. German fighters had learned to exploit the B-17's weaknesses. They attacked from head-on where defensive armament was lightest. They used cannon instead of machine guns, firing from beyond the effective range of the American 50s. Most devastating, they had discovered that a damaged bomber, separated from the formation, was easy prey. Intelligence reports showed that 70% of bombers shot down had first been damaged and forced to drop behind. The formation provided survival. Alone, a B-17 was dead meat. The Luftwaffe knew it. American crews knew it. Every briefing ended with the same warning: stay in formation no matter what. Lieutenant Colonel Addison Baker understood this better than most. At 33, he was ancient by bomber pilot standards. Most pilots were barely into their 20s. Baker had joined the Army Air Corps before the war, rising through the ranks on experience and skill rather than the accelerated wartime promotions that created boy commanders. He led the 414th Bomb Squadron, part of the 97th Bomb Group, the first American heavy bomber unit to see combat in Europe. They had flown missions since August 1942, learning hard lessons over occupied France before deploying to North Africa for Operation Torch. Baker's philosophy was simple: tight formations, mutual support, and discipline. Crews that panicked died. Crews that maintained discipline came home. Statistics supported his approach. The 97th Bomb Group had lost 14 aircraft in 5 months of operations. Other groups with looser formations and less experienced leadership lost twice that number. But the numbers were still horrific. Of every 100 bombers dispatched, 8 never returned. Of every 100 crewmen, 80 would be killed, wounded, or captured before completing their 25-mission combat tour. The mathematics were brutal. Nobody talked about them, but everyone knew. Every mission was a roll of the dice. Every mission reduced your odds of surviving the next. Some crews developed superstitions. Lucky boots, lucky jackets. Rituals performed before every flight. Bragg's crew had their own. They always boarded through the rear door, never the front. They never spoke the words, "last mission." They never counted missions remaining, only missions completed. The collision happened during the bomb run. Bragg was focused on maintaining position, watching the lead aircraft for the signal to open bomb bay doors. German anti-aircraft fire burst around the formation, black puffs that appeared like evil flowers blooming in empty air. The aircraft shuddered from near misses. Then Lieutenant Robert L. Fuller's B-17, flying slightly above and behind Bragg's bomber, encountered a flak burst that jarred it sideways. Fuller's aircraft slid forward, losing altitude in a shallow dive. The two bombers converged at a combined closing speed of nearly 300 miles per hour. Fuller's pilots saw it happening. Bragg's crew never did. The first indication was the grinding shriek of tearing metal and the horrific impact that threw men against bulkheads. Before we continue, I'd love to know if you've ever heard stories of aircraft surviving impossible damage. Drop a comment below and let me know if you're familiar with the legendary durability of the B-17 Flying Fortress. If you're enjoying this level of historical detail, please subscribe to the channel. These deep dives take serious research, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Fuller's B-17 struck All-American through from above and behind. The impact zone began just forward of the horizontal stabilizer and continued through the entire rear fuselage. To understand what this meant requires understanding the B-17's construction. Boeing engineers built the fuselage using a semi-monocoque design. An internal frame of circular bulkheads connected by longitudinal stringers formed the skeleton. Thin aluminum skin, riveted to this frame, created the external surface and provided structural strength. When Fuller's bomber struck, its propellers chewed through All-American 3's fuselage like circular saws through aluminum foil. The collision severed almost the entire rear section. Only a small portion of the lower fuselage remained attached, a strip perhaps 10 inches wide running along the bottom. Everything else was gone or hanging by threads. The damage was catastrophic beyond measure. Looking aft from the radio compartment, Bragg's crew could see daylight through a gap nearly 4 feet wide. The tail section, including the entire empennage with horizontal and vertical stabilizers, hung connected to the main fuselage by almost nothing. The control cables running from the cockpit to the tail surfaces were severed. The tail gunner, Sergeant Joseph Shea, found himself isolated in a compartment that swayed independently from the rest of the aircraft. He could feel the tail section flexing, moving up and down through an arc of several feet. Looking forward through the shattered fuselage, he saw the main aircraft and realized with horror that he was essentially riding in a separate piece, held on by a sliver of metal and pure chance. In the cockpit, Bragg fought for control. The aircraft wanted to pitch nose down. Without elevator authority, he had no direct means to counter this tendency, but the B-17's designers had built-in redundancy. By adjusting engine power and using the trim tabs, small auxiliary control surfaces that could be adjusted electrically, Bragg discovered he could maintain level flight. It required constant attention. The aircraft wanted to wander. It wanted to fall. But by balancing power against trim, thrust against drag, he kept it flying. Co-pilot Engel worked the throttles while Bragg manipulated the trim wheels. They developed a rhythm, a constant dance of small adjustments that kept the wounded bomber in the air. Neither man spoke the obvious: this couldn't last. The tail section could separate completely at any moment. When it did, the aircraft would tumble, uncontrollable, and they would all die. The technical challenge was extraordinary. Aircraft designers calculated that the B-17 could withstand combat damage to approximately 30% of its structure and remain airworthy. All American III had lost nearly 80% of its rear fuselage structural integrity. The tail section's weight, approximately 1/200 pounds, now hung on a structural connection rated for perhaps 1/10 that load. Every vibration, every air current, every control input stressed that tiny remaining attachment point. The aircraft was flying at 23,000 feet, where the air temperature was 40 degrees below zero. Aluminum becomes brittle at low temperatures. Metal fatigue accelerates under stress. Every second that the aircraft remained airborne was a second closer to catastrophic structural failure. Bragg knew this. His crew knew this. But descending meant leaving the formation, and leaving the formation meant certain death from German fighters. The bombardier, Richardson, called over the intercom. They were approaching the target. Did Bragg want to abort? Drop the bombs in the ocean and head for home? Bragg's answer was immediate. We complete the mission. The 8 500-pound bombs in the bomb bay added 4,000 pounds of weight. Jettisoning them would improve their chances of survival, but it would also mean abandoning the mission, leaving the formation one bomber short, reducing the tonnage dropped on target. Bragg had never aborted a mission. He wasn't starting now. The bomb bay doors groaned open. Wind screamed through the shattered fuselage. The tail section flexed more violently. Men held on to anything bolted down. Richardson made his calculations, compensating for the aircraft's instability. The lead bombardier's bombs fell away. Richardson counted, then toggled. All American III's bombs tumbled free, arcing toward the harbor below. The immediate concern was altitude. Could they maintain 23,000 feet for the flight home, or would they have to descend, becoming a straggler, a target? Bragg attempted a gentle climb. The aircraft responded, but sluggishly. The shattered fuselage was creating tremendous drag. It was like flying with a barn door attached to the tail. Fuel consumption increased dramatically. The severed rear fuselage disrupted airflow over the tail surfaces, reducing their effectiveness. The vertical stabilizer, crucial for directional control, was still there but partially compromised. Bragg tested the rudder pedals cautiously. Some authority remained, but not much. Turns would have to be gentle, coordinated carefully between rudder and aileron. A sharp bank could stress the tail attachment beyond its limit. Every decision carried life or death consequences. Every control input could be the one that caused complete structural failure. The flight engineer, Sergeant Nussel, made his way aft to assess the damage. What he found defied belief. The collision had created a gap so wide he could have walked through it sideways. Insulation hung in tatters. Hydraulic fluid misted in the slipstream. Electrical cables sparked intermittently. The tail gunner's compartment rocked like a boat in heavy seas. Nussel realized that Shea was trapped. The normal passage through the fuselage was impassable. Shea couldn't return to the main aircraft. If the tail separated, he would die alone, riding the severed section down. There was nothing Nussel could do except return to the cockpit and report. The tail could separate at any moment. They were flying on borrowed time. Bragg made his decision. They would stay with the formation to the coast, then descend over friendly territory. If the tail was going to separate, better it happen over land where rescue was possible than over the Mediterranean where survival was measured in minutes. The formation droned westward. Anti-aircraft fire fell behind. German fighters appeared, black specks in the distance, but didn't attack the formation. Bragg flew with mechanical precision. Every movement deliberate, every control input minimal. The bomber vibrated continuously, a shuddering that spoke of structural stress beyond design limits. Men watched the tail section, waiting for it to tear free. Minutes passed like hours. The coast appeared ahead. The descent began at the North African shoreline. Bragg reduced power symmetrically. All 4 engines throttled back together. The aircraft settled, losing altitude at 500 feet per minute. The formation continued at cruise altitude, pulling ahead and above. All-American III was now alone, descending through hostile airspace, damaged beyond any rational hope of survival. If German fighters spotted them, it was over. They had perhaps 2 working machine guns. The waist positions were compromised. The tail gunner was isolated. The ball turret gunner had cranked his turret to the stowed position and climbed into the radio compartment. They were defenseless. Bragg pushed the throttles forward slightly, trading fuel for speed. Faster meant less time exposed. Faster also meant more stress on the damaged structure. At 10,000 feet, the crew could remove their oxygen masks. The temperature rose to a merely freezing 20 degrees. The tail section continued to flex, but it held. Whatever sliver of structure remained, whatever particular arrangement of intact stringers and unbroken skin, it was enough. Barely impossibly enough. The airfield appeared ahead, a brown strip cut into the Tunisian desert. Bragg called the tower, explaining their situation. Emergency crews scrambled. Ambulances raced toward the runway. Fire trucks took position. Nobody expected All-American III to land successfully. The assumption was crash landing, casualties, fire. Bragg configured the aircraft for landing. Gear down, flaps extended partially, airspeed high to maintain control authority. A normal landing speed was 95 miles per hour. Bragg crossed the threshold at 120, afraid that slower speeds would make the aircraft uncontrollable. The main wheels touched. The bomber settled. Bragg held the nose up, using the tail section's damaged structure to help slow the aircraft. It worked. The nose wheel touched gently. Bragg applied brakes cautiously, afraid that any asymmetric stress might finally tear the tail free. The bomber rolled straight, slowing, stopping. Silence descended. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. Then Sergeant Shea's voice came over the intercom from the tail compartment. "Can somebody get me out of here?" The ground crew who surrounded All-American III stood in stunned silence. The damage was beyond anything they had seen. Technical inspectors from the 97th Bomb Group examined the wreckage. They measured the remaining structural connection. An intact section of lower fuselage approximately 8 inches wide and 30 inches long. That was it. That tiny strip of aluminum, rivets, and internal structure had held the tail section attached through a bomb run, a 200-mile flight home, and a landing. Engineers calculated the stress loads. Under normal flight conditions, that small section should have separated at approximately 1/10 the load it had actually endured. There was no engineering explanation. The aircraft should not have flown. It should not have survived. But it did. The impact of All-American III's survival rippled through the bomber command. Intelligence officers documented the incident meticulously. Engineers studied the wreckage, taking measurements, analyzing the failure modes, attempting to understand how the structure had held. Their findings influenced subsequent B-17 designs. Boeing strengthened the aft fuselage attachment points in later production models. Training protocols changed. Pilots learned that even catastrophic damage didn't necessarily mean abandonment. The story spread through bomber squadrons like wildfire. If All-American III could survive, maybe other damaged aircraft had a chance. Maybe the instinct to bail out should be tempered with attempts to save the aircraft. The psychological impact was profound. Crews gained confidence in their bombers. The Flying Fortress legend grew. Fuller's B-17, which had struck All-American III, lost its nose section in the collision. Fuller and his co-pilot maintained control long enough for the crew to bail out. 7 men parachuted successfully over Tunisia. 2 were killed in the collision, the navigator and bombardier, who occupied the nose section that separated. Fuller himself survived the war, returned home, and never flew again. He spent his remaining years haunted by the collision, though subsequent investigation placed no blame on him or his crew. The flak burst had initiated the sequence. What followed was simply tragedy compounded by impossible circumstance. After the war, Fuller and Bragg met once in 1957 at a bomber reunion. They shook hands, spoke briefly, and never contacted each other again. Some experiences are too heavy to carry jointly. Captain Kendrick Bragg continued flying combat missions. He completed his 25-mission tour in May 1943 and returned to the United States. The Army Air Forces assigned him to Training Command, where he taught new pilots the lessons learned over Europe and North Africa. He emphasized formation discipline, damage assessment, and the critical importance of staying calm under catastrophic circumstances. His standard lecture included a simple statement: "Your aircraft can survive more than you think. Trust it. Fly it until it quits flying." After the war, Bragg left military service and returned to Washington State. He worked as a civilian flight instructor, taught high school mathematics, and raised 4 children. He rarely spoke about the war. When pressed, he would describe the collision clinically, factually, without emotion. He died in 1989, 67 years old, having lived a quiet life that contrasted sharply with those few terrible hours over Tunisia. Sergeant Joseph Shea, the tail gunner who rode the severed section home, never flew combat again. After landing, he was diagnosed with severe psychological trauma. The experience of being isolated in a compartment that could separate at any second, while knowing that separation meant certain death, broke something inside him. The Army Air Forces reassigned him to ground duties. He worked in supply, far from aircraft, far from flight lines. He completed his service in 1945 and returned to civilian life in Ohio. He married, worked in a factory, and never willingly flew again. Commercial air travel terrified him. When his daughter married in California in 1962, he took the train. When asked why, he simply said he'd used up his lifetime allotment of luck in a single mission. Historical assessment of the All-American 3 incident has evolved. Initially dismissed as a lucky anomaly, the event is now studied in aviation safety courses as an example of structural redundancy and pilot skill under extreme duress. Modern stress analysis using computer modeling confirms that the remaining structure was stressed beyond theoretical failure limits. Some engineers speculate that cold welding, a phenomenon where metal surfaces in contact can bond at molecular levels under extreme pressure, may have temporarily strengthened the damaged area. Others point to simple luck. The exact pattern of damage left intact the most critical load-bearing components. Declassified German records show no fighter intercepts in the area during All-American 3's descent, suggesting their vulnerability was never tested. What seems certain is that multiple factors aligned improbably: structural coincidence, pilot skill, enemy absence, and simple fortune. The broader lesson of All-American 3 resonates beyond World War II. The incident demonstrates that human determination can overcome calculations of probability. Engineers can predict failure modes, calculate stress limits, and define operating parameters. But in actual emergency conditions, unpredictable factors emerge. Material properties vary. Structural redundancies activate in unexpected ways. Human skill compensates for mechanical impossibility. The story has inspired pilots facing damaged aircraft for 80 years. When control surfaces fail, when engines quit, when structures crack, the memory of that B-17 held together by 8 inches of aluminum reminds aviators that impossible and improbable are different categories. Impossible means no chance. Improbable means small chance. And small chances, pursued with skill and courage, sometimes succeed. The wreckage of All-American 3 was stripped for parts and scrapped. No museum preserved it. No monument marks the spot where it landed. The men who flew it scattered to civilian lives, carrying memories they rarely shared. But the story survived in official records, in training documents, in the oral tradition of military aviation. It survives because it represents something fundamental about human nature. We don't quit when mathematics says we should. We fight impossible odds. We try when trying seems futile. Sometimes we fail. Sometimes we die trying. But occasionally, improbably, against all calculation and reason, we succeed. We fly a broken bomber home. We land it safely. We survive. That February afternoon in Tunisia, 10 men climbed out of an aircraft that shouldn't have stayed airborne. They walked away from wreckage that should have killed them. They lived because their pilot refused to quit, because their aircraft was built with a margin of safety beyond anyone's calculations, and because random chance aligned in their favor. History remembers thousands of aircraft that fell from the sky. It remembers relatively few that stayed aloft against physical laws. All American III earned its place in that rare company. The lesson echoes through history. Human courage and engineering excellence, combined with determination and a measure of fortune, can achieve what calculation declares impossible. The bomber that took hundreds of bullets in other missions and survived, that absorbed flak damage and continued, met its ultimate test in a collision that should have ended it. Instead, it became legend. The story teaches us that giving up should always be the last option, never the first. That flying it until it quits flying isn't just doctrine. It's wisdom purchased with the lives of those who quit too soon, validated by the survival of those who refuse to accept the mathematics of doom. All American III refused to die. And 10 men lived because of it.